All right. Hello, OAS family. Just a really quick little introduction here because we have a very special video book review for you coming up. But I feel like the occasion is significant enough that I wanted to give you a short introduction. So what is very exciting is that we have just received this book. And this book is Chinese Brush Painting and Instructional Guide, the Gold Edition by Ning Yeh. So many of you know the predecessor for this book, which we still have limited copies of, but we have now basically the successor to that book all finished. And this is kind of the story of how it all came together. So, of course, the original book was published many years ago. I think it came out in the late 80s. And it has since sort of established itself as kind of like the Bible of Chinese brush painting instruction, at least one that is targeted at English speakers. So that book was very important and very significant. And what was happening was that we were actually getting to the point where we were going to have to reprint additional copies of that book. And what happened was that our printer lost the original plates for the book. So we were faced with the necessity of having to basically retypeset the entire book to publish it again. And my father felt it was very important that if we were going to go through all the work of retypesetting the book, that the book should really be modernized and brought into the current time period with all the latest innovations and all the latest changes that he had made to his teaching technique. So that is, so with the help, significant help from one of his students, Mayee Futterman, they set out together to create this new version, which is the Chinese Brush Painting and Instructional Guide, the Gold Edition. So this is why we have this book here, and it's very exciting that we have it. And we'll go ahead and get into the specifics of what makes this book different from the last book as we get into our actual video book review. But we're super excited. We have copies of it here that are available for people who want to take advantage of it. And here, without further ado, is the actual review. All right, hello OAS family. So here we are getting into the new review for our brand new Chinese Brush Painting and Instructional Guide Gold Edition by Ning Yeh. So we're going to talk a little bit about comparing the two books, but only in terms of general statistics. We've published a full review on the original book. It's available online on our YouTube channel, so you can check out our full review if you want to compare the content. But in general, what I would say is that the new book is completely updated to the most modern teaching styles and materials that are available. And so if you're looking for a standalone book, I would definitely opt for the newer book. If you have a desire to go through the original telecourse, Chinese Brush Painting and Instructional Guide, this original book was actually published as a textbook for a telecourse. And we do have the videos from that original course available. And we are planning in the process of making them available online and making them available as a course. So if you want to actually take that course and you want a textbook that maps very closely to the videos, then it is good to have this original book. So if you want to compare the general statistics, this original book is smaller, so it's 10.5 inches long by about 7 3/8 inches high, and it's about 189 pages. Where the new book, it's 8.5 inches tall by 11 5/8 inches bigger, so it's slightly bigger in size and also has more pages. It has 212 pages rather than 189 pages. So we're going to go ahead and get into the actual book. So we have here the initial pages and just some little tidbits of storytelling and philosophy, getting you a sense for you know, like the personality of my father and what he brings to his instruction. So here is the title page, and we have like a preface, which is from the original book here. You can see it's dated 87. And then he follows it up with a preface to the gold edition, so you can kind of see the context for why why we chose to make a whole new edition of the book. Then we have here the table of contents. So the introduction, this is really great because it talks a little bit about the philosophy behind brush painting and its background in Taoism and Confucianism. So this is really important to tie the painting form as an expression of the culture. And then talks a little bit about the categories, the types of subjects. You know, we have four gentlemen, flower and bird painting, landscape painting. And then we get into this idea of xie, the xie style, which is another name for the spontaneous style of painting. And talks about it in the context of the other brush painting styles that are out there. And then we get into this section on equipment. So here is probably one of the first differentiators, as when this book, the original book was published, our materials were quite different. And since then we have improved every aspect of the materials. So we now have a book that maps to our most modern recommendations, the highest quality starting materials. And I think that that's quite important because having better materials at the beginning always produces a less frustrating, more joyful experience. So you can see here that we are leading with our new idea of two different brush sets. We have our premium artist brush set, which has a couple of our flow brushes, and then the Happy Dot and the Orchid bamboo brush. And then for those of you who are looking for more of a budget option, we have our pre-series brushes, and also our important innovations in specialty brushes are also described here, where we have our mountain horse brushes and the Biff brush, of course, for making those bamboo trunks easier. So a lot of updates as far as materials go related to brushes. And then we have the paper, talking about different types of paper and sizing. We have different concepts in ink, whether or not you're going to use a bottled ink or ink stick or ink stone. These are all discussed, and also why we prefer our best bottle ink for painting. And he talks about the variations of the shades of gray. And then we have the color concepts here, different ideas for how how he wants you to mix the color, whether the mixing is going to be diluted or strong or pasty. So what you're sort of seeing here is that what Ning Yeh has created is a system for brush painting education, and the system is tied very closely to the OAS materials. And the system is a very proven system. We've had thousands of people successfully go through the system and learn how to brush paint from having no experience at all. So we're quite confident in the system's ability to teach. And so these initial pages are sort of investing you into the idea that there is a system there, and it's describing some of the principles that govern the system so that you can have an easier time as you get into the nitty-gritty of the teaching. So we have here different color options, talking about the sort of east-west color options, where we have his preferred palette, which is an east-west palette here as option B. We have option A, which is a more traditional Asian palette, and then we have other options that are easier to take on the go, like our Ideal Companion, or they're good for budget purposes if people want to substitute the Chinese watercolor tubes for the pricier Western watercolors. So talking about the describing the east-west color set here, and the how they work together. And then talking about color loading and blending here, how we fade the colors, a little bit about how the colors are mixed, and then a little bit of details on the budget-friendly color sets. And then here's a very important piece, which is a color equivalency chart. So this is trying to bridge the gap between the different color systems and how you're going to create each of the colors that are referred to in the lessons with each different color system. This is like a super important piece of a tool here for allowing you to choose whatever color option makes sense for you, but at the same time still be able to follow the instruction very clearly. A bit about the studio setup and the accessories that come with the studio setup. And talking about the basics of holding the brush. Really nice that it goes into this because these are very critical techniques for being able to do the brush strokes correctly. And how to load the brush here. So we have loading ink and colors at the same time, how we are preparing the tip of the brush, and how to load multiple layers onto a brush at once so we can get those strokes that show blending from one color to the other. And then this beautiful grass orchid here is as an example. So we get that transitions very nicely into our first subject, which is the orchid. So a little bit of idea on the history of the orchid, cultural significance. He talks about the anatomy here, and then he gets into a little bit about like the pieces, like the leaves of the orchid, and then the materials and preparation. And we get into the defining aspect of this book, which is you have stroke by stroke instruction. So this is not illustrative where it's sort of saying, like showing you groups of strokes and saying, okay, you know, get there however you want to get there. Or here's an idea of how you might proceed. This is really telling you from beginning to end how you're going to do the strokes. So we're talking a little bit about the first and the second strokes, which come together to make this iconic phoenix eye. This is a very important compositional element. And then he adds the third stroke here. And then we have our first appearance of something that was very helpful in the first book, which is a boo-boo pad, which also shows what not to do. So we have boo-boo pads here of showing common mistakes and how to avoid them. So we get into the full composition for the orchid leaf, and then again, more of these common mistakes, so to avoid these common compositional mistakes when painting the leaves. Now he's getting into the second major aspect of the orchid, which is the flower. Talks about material preparation, how the strokes are done and laid out, different shapes of the different types of strokes, where we have this like new moon or this reversed S or this regular S. And again, we have a boo-boo pad to outline common errors for this type of stroke. So here's how the petals are grouped together to make like a flower bud. And again, we have boo-boo pad and how petals are paired with center petal and side petal, and then how he varies the petal groups to provide different options for types of compositions. Then we're starting to get into the stem and the direction and the sheath, and how he paints that sheath to hold the stem and to hold the flower. So more ideas about stem and sheath. Then these center dots or happy dots that are used to accent the final piece of the flower bud for the orchid. And then different ideas for flowers in different states, whether it's like bud or partially open or fully opened. And then he gets into principles of composition. And this is a key distinction, I think, between the two books, is that he has taken extra space to show some of the more iconic subjects in color. So largely in the first book, a lot of it, this was partially done due to sort of printing limitations, but a lot of the subjects were in pure ink. And so he does lead, of course, with ink for the most iconic subjects to keep it simpler, but then he introduces also how those subjects would look in color. So that's a nice enhancement, I think, for this book. Now we get into bamboo. So we have the anatomy of the bamboo and materials and preparation. And here we see also another key difference, which is now we are leading the trunk technique with the biff brush. This is a huge change because the original book is showing a technique of painting the trunk with a large soft brush, which is a much trickier brush to use to paint the trunk, but it was what we had available at that time. So just having this lesson and having a trunk technique in this book that is with the biff brush is a really key improvement. I think it will help a lot of people take the frustration out of painting bamboo trunks. And then we have these ideas of the ring joints and different styles of the ring joints. First phase, second phase, third phase. And then boo-boo pads related to the ring joints. And then this idea of the eye of the dragonfly, or these dots that are used to depict rings on more slender branches. So here is, the book is getting into these smaller twigs or smaller bamboo twigs. And then we have our first appearance of the dreaded chicken foot. So for those of you who have taken in-person classes with my father, he knows we're always trying to avoid this chicken foot thing in the composition. So we have a boo-boo pad here showing a chicken foot. And then he gets into the bone stroke. This is a very key stroke that for Chinese brush painting that comes from calligraphy. So going into the bone stroke here and showing the technique of doing the bone stroke. Now we're talking about the bamboo leaves. And this huge section on leaf groupings and how to show them in profile and rainy day leaves and all these different ways to depicting the leaves. Also with a boo-boo pad to showing you common mistakes when painting leaves. So you can see that because he limits the subjects in these books, this is really a great approach for a first book because you get a lot of detail on each subject. And this changes with his future books because the idea behind the books is the earlier books were to build a foundation, so they went slower, they had fewer subjects, and then once you got the foundation under your belt, then with the books he wanted to give you more subjects, more bang for your buck, and thinking that you wouldn't need as detailed of an explanation because you are getting a foundation for the techniques of how to in general do these paintings in his first two books and in this book in particular. So we get into the conclusion for the bamboo clusters and leaves, and then we get into composition. So here we have simple composition that shows host and guest leaf clusters and introducing this idea of host and guest, which is a very central idea in how he thinks about composition. And then we have different types of bamboo, these windy bamboos or this umbrella cluster. And then again, just like with the orchid, we're showing examples in color and some instruction about how to create color versions of the subject, and then some final compositions here. So now we're getting into Panda. So this is a subject, I think that his approach on the subject has changed quite a bit since the original book. So you'll notice some changes here in this subject. More moving towards an idea of capturing the spirit of Panda, and I think less preoccupied with, you know, something that is more focused on physical depiction. So we have this sitting panda here. We have the idea of the head and profile. And then we have the diagrams of strokes for this position of the panda and this baby panda in profile. Then we have a proportion study for the walking panda. And we show the strokes here of the walking panda. He calls this position the I am not worthy position, which is sort of this submissive kind of head down kind of composition. So really cool here because you get a lot more compositions in this subject than in the original book. And it's kind of great because once you start learning this subject, you want to paint them a lot. And this gives you a tool set for painting groups of the animals, which is, I think, how they are most joyfully depicted, because they really do enjoy playing together quite a bit. So here is this Camellia. We move on next. So this is our first subject where we're going to lead with color. And very important subject, as I think it is kind of the gateway to this whole world of Chinese flower painting. And so the Camellia is a really important subject in that regard. Chinese flower painting, there's a really high value proposition because the strokes are very similar from flower to flower. So once you learn them in the context of a simple flower like Camellia, you really open up a lot of different subjects for yourself. So showing his idea for building a main flower compositionally, this 3 strokes that he puts into a U shape, and different ways that that can go wrong in these boo-boo pads. The colors here are so beautiful and vibrant, and I'm noticing a nice difference in the printing from the old book to this book. The colors are really nice and intense. So now we're showing the flower with the pistil and stamen and these little pollen dots. And this is how he depicts the buds. We get into the leaves for the Camellia. Once again, the Camellia has very iconic, classic looking leaves. So it is an excellent subject for practicing leaves. And then the different ways to depict these leaves, they're downward, they're folding, they have all these different types of positions. So this is really great leaf study. And then into the branches, where we're again showing these bone strokes that we covered earlier and how they are linked together to make branches. And then obviously various boo-boo pads for things to avoid when depicting the branches. And then we get into the Camellia, the composition, part 3. And we're showing these nice, simple Camellia compositions. And I think that is also a key difference between the first book and this book, is that there are more varied compositions, and I think there are more simple compositions. So that is really nice to have in an elementary book, where you have more variety and things that are simpler as well, just so it can be a little bit less overwhelming. So we have 4 different, 5, 6 different compositions here outlined for Camellia. So, and then some ideas of different ways that he varies the color to bring different looks to the subject. Then we get into Amaryllis. So we have sort of like a classic looking flower in Camellia, and then this Amaryllis, which is one of these sort of like taller, long-leafed flowers, which represents a whole group of, you know, things like canna and Dutch iris, and there's a lot of category of flowers that look like this. So he's chosen Amaryllis as a representation for these kinds of flowers. Talks about the anatomy here. And we're getting into these, how he links these strokes in composition to sort of form the flower. Really great detail here about how the strokes are placed in composition. And then he goes into this, a very key technique where he sort of places the strokes initially, leaving this white space, and then he goes in with a darker color and links the center of the flower with these outer petals with this darker color. And this technique he uses over and over again in the various flower studies. So it's very good to see it stand alone here and to practice it in the context of the Amaryllis. So different orientations for different flowers, facing different ways, different fullness in the petals. And then the idea of showing the flower in profile. And then we get into the composition idea for the Amaryllis. Here's a grouping of 3 flowers, a grouping of 4 flowers, talking about the sheath here and the stem and the stalk. Different compositional ideas for the leaves. And then we have Amaryllis composition number 1, number 2, and then we get into Peony. So Peony is an absolutely iconic subject in Chinese painting, so it's good that it is included here. Very symbolic, recently adopted as the national flower for China, so also very relevant in a modern state. It's a very interesting idea that China chose and switched its national flower from the plum blossom, which is representation of resilience through tough times, into peony, which is representation of abundance, of blossoming in good times. And so that is just a signal of where China is envisioning itself as a country going forward. So we have compositional ideas for building the peony flower. Again, we have this sort of U shape that we saw in the Camellia reoccurring. The placement of the seed pod in the center here. And then this building of the flower with these foreground and petals in the back. And also sealing the center like we did with the Amaryllis with this darker color. Really great Chinese flower painting techniques outlined in these subjects. And then here's the part 2 of the peony, which talks about other elements. We have like a baby bud and then this sort of teenager flower and the leaves. Different orientations for the peony leaves, upward, downwards, younger leaves, which have more of the red in them, and then the more mature leaves, which he is showing more to accent with ink. Then we talk about branches, and then composition for peony. Here's the first composition. Lots of detail for how to build this first composition. And then composition number 2, which is a little bit more compact and focused, showing just a single flower rather than a flower and a bud. Okay, now we get into the horse. This is the Yeh family tradition. So 500 years of horse painting tradition in the family. So very important subject, particularly of importance to our family and my father in particular. So if you see him demonstrate horse, he always starts with the eyes, because the eyes tell you the direction that the animal wants to go. So he's showing you how to build the eyes and the two lines that detail the snout. And then gets into the nostril and the lips and the lower face and the cheek line, building the head stroke by stroke. And then we get into the neck and how he does the initial shading, how he does the manes. Here are these very dynamic strokes that are used for the mane of the horse. And then different ideas for a completed horse head, both in this classic direction that he showed, and then different, like this sort of side-facing direction here, in these different running poses. So talking about the horse's body here, showing the idea that the shape is, for the horse body, is just like a rectangle, or this three-dimensional rectangular cube. And talking about the chest lines and how they link with the head, and then the ink work for the chest. Getting into the front legs. And more of the ink work here. And then talking about the hindquarters here. Different strokes for the back legs. And then the strokes that he uses to depict the tail. And then we have different horse compositions. We have this one, this celestial horse, sort of like leaping pose. And then this one, which is more going backwards away from you. And we get into this idea of landscape next. So here's the section on landscape, talking about this idea in general of landscape, which is mountains and water. So showing here this idea that it's mountains meeting the mist in the water. And then key concepts compositionally, how to show depth in composition. And then breaking that down in a little bit greater detail, showing these root points that determine the depth of the composition. And then talking about mistakes that you can make compositionally, talking about how to set a focus for a landscape painting in general. So creating this idea of the composition leading to a center. And then also this idea of using dark tones and V-shaped white spaces to guide and enhance the focus. Lots of really important landscape composition theories outlined here. Talking about the flow of a painting and how to establish either horizontal or vertical flow, and then talking about light sources. This is like a brand new work that was done on a grouping of work that was all about light and showing light. So really great that this makes an appearance here. It's a very special painting, and it's nice that he used it as a point of teaching. Also, this idea of these very simple landscapes where the strokes are fewer and the depiction is more abstract. So it's nice that he has this example of this, and also showing this can be done on raw paper rather than the semi-sized paper with the techniques, the wash techniques that he's using. So this is a little bit of a freer, simpler technique, and it's nice that was included in the book because it was not included in the original book. The landscape section in general is much more fleshed out than the original book. So we talk about texture and coloring and lines and blending the three in the context of landscape painting, and then showing the breakdown step by step. This is texture and ink shading, and then the coloring, and then the last step, which is using washes to depict the mist. And a couple other ideas showing completed compositions and how the steps are integrated. So we have this section here on signature and seal. So it's important to learn how to finish a painting in the traditional way, being able to sign it and put your name seal on it, and also use mood seals if you want. So talking about how the seals are placed and the signature is placed to balance the composition. And showing different examples. How you can use the signature and the seal to enhance a composition, basically. So different examples of seal and signature placement is really nice here, that he shows this many examples of ideas for signature and seal. Then we have a whole section on mounting. So this is also good that this was modernized to include all the latest techniques. Very critical and anxiety inducing subject, you know, because people have these finished paintings and they're very pleased with them, and then they get to wet mounting them and they're scared that they're going to ruin them. So it's important that you practice. You mount with practice pieces, of course, and get comfortable with the process, but we've taught many people how to wet mount, and we all know how to wet mount ourselves. So we're very sure that it's a process through the proper trial and error you can get confident with, and it really changes your mindset as an artist, because you know you can finish your work, you know you can prepare it for framing, and that gets you into the mindset of making finished pieces. So a little bit of biographical information here. So this was nice that he was able to update this to include the work that he did for the Weyerhaeuser Paper Company. That was a really important piece of important creative phase that, of course, was not documented in the original book because of when the book was published. And then he also shows you all the rest of the books that he's published since the original instructional guide. So you can see all the rest of them here. And there we have it. So that is it. That is Chinese Brush Painting and Instructional Guide, Gold Edition. Make sure that you pick up a copy, and make sure you like and subscribe for more content like this. We're so super excited that this book is now available, and we wish you would get a copy for yourself, and we wish you happy painting.